Hi, this is Skip Stewart, Vice President and Chief Improvement Officer at Baptist Memorial Healthcare. Today, we're going to share another video. We're going to talk about a tool called relationship mapping. Relationship mapping is part of our humble inquiry learning process, which is ultimately part of the Baptist management system, our improvement system. I'm joined today with my good friend, Peter Schein, and we're going to walk through this map. Before we do that, though, I want to talk to you about a little bit about the second edition of Humble Inquiry, because this tool comes out of that. And Humble Inquiry talks about an art and an attitude. It talks about the art of drawing someone out, asking questions which you really do not know the answer. You're building a relationship based on curiosity and interest in another person. Now, the attitude, it talks about listening more deeply to how others respond to your inquiry, responding appropriately, and revealing more of yourself in the relationship building process. Peter, is there anything that you would add or comments that you would want to provide when it comes to the art and attitude of humble inquiry?
I think, Skip, I want to sort of everybody to feel confident that, in fact, you already know how to do this. We've created a slide that has, it has 7 points on it, and you might feel like you need to really memorize those points, but I'm not sure you do, because I think you already know how to do this. This is about conversation, and it's about the two-way street that relationships really are. So this isn't you just drawing somebody out. This is also you revealing something about yourself. And we do this all the time. The question is, how comfortable are we doing this in our professional context? And our charge to you is become comfortable doing this in your professional context, because it will help you get your job done.
Fantastic, fantastic. As we get started here, I do want to bring attention and dedicate this video to the memory of Dr. Edgar Schein. I was very privileged and honored to have a 2+ year relationship with Ed and Peter and their family, and I will forever be so grateful for the many conversations and the many things that Ed really taught me. I want to provide a little more context. This tool that we're going to learn about, relationship mapping, is within the context of a socio-technical system. Ed would always argue that healthcare was the most complex socio-technical system. Now, that word can sound kind of heavy. Socio just means people, technical means process, and we know that a system is a whole that cannot be separated into individual parts. So socio, people, technical, process, and a system is a whole that cannot be separated into individual parts. So that's the context, healthcare, that we're talking about this tool called relationship mapping. Now, there are many mapping tools for the improvement folks out there. You've probably been involved with value stream mapping, which is powerful, SIPOX diagrams, traditional process diagram mapping, and they are super powerful, and there's more that I'm not mentioning right now, but many of those tools do tend to focus on the technical aspect, and we're going to learn about something that focuses on the socio side of it, on the how do we make the invisible visible in this thing that we call relationship mapping. So imagine here that you have a traditional organizational chart. Now, this is just a piece out of a larger organization, but in this organizational chart, you can see yourself. There you are. You report to Javier, and you have peers or counterparts. This would be a traditional matrix organization. You can see that Frank and Jane and VJ report to you, but Frank and Jane and VJ also report to Amanda. And we're going to learn that Amanda is a project manager here in a minute. But one of the things that we want to get into right away is you would make this relationship map in the privacy of yourself. A organizational chart is a public document. This is a private document. So you might take a piece of paper, draw a circle, and put you in the middle. And you can see that we have Javier, Jane, Frank, and VJ. But before we move forward anymore, I want Peter to talk about different types of interdependence, a passive interdependence versus an active interdependence.
Yeah, thanks, Skip. So I actually just quickly want to step back with a little bit more history on this mapping, because I think it leads into this interdependence point. That when we first started talking about this, or I should say when Ed first started talking about this, was last century, and it was referred to as job role planning. And it was much more of a kind of a almost mechanical process that maybe put this map a little bit more like an org chart. You might have even had it be a public document. And what we sort of said is what's really important is to think about not the role, which is more of a kind of a published or an organization-wide understanding. And let's think about, rather than just that role, let's think about what's the actual relationship within that role. So in a lot of our discussions in multiple books in the last few years, we try to make that distinction between what's the role that the organization might see and what's the actual relationship that has a direct bearing on how you and that person with whom you have a relationship can actually get your work done. So with that sort of context, think about what's the difference between role and relationship as you're trying to visualize all of this. And then with that, think about what, one way of thinking about what a relationship actually is, we define it as where you have a sort of a mutual understanding or mutual expectation of each other. But another way to think of that is that you have an interdependence with each other. And there's a couple ways of thinking about interdependence. One is sort of that loose or passive interdependence where you can get your job done, but it would be good if that person over in your adjacent apartment would do a few things that would support your cause. You have a sort of passive interdependence with that person. And the same might be true for them. And in fact, you might be explicit about it and sort of share that recognition that you have that it would be nice if they did it this way. It's not mission critical to you, it's not mission critical to them, but it would be nice. So that's what we sort of think of as passive interdependence. Active interdependence is what do you really need from somebody, or what do you rely on them for? And similarly with you, what do they rely on you for in order to keep the system working? And these things are scales. We present them as passive and active, but the reality is, these are shades of gray. They're not black or white. And we should always think of them in those terms. So as we go through this mapping, we're suggesting that part of how you can help yourself visualize your relationships and your relationship map is to use this framing of interdependence and use the solid line or the dotted line to kind of take that stab at how can I characterize this relationship? Is this active interdependence or is this passive interdependence? And then we'll go on from there. But think about interdependence as another way of saying, okay, this is an important relationship because I recognize that I have an interdependence with another person, and how can I characterize it? Passive, active.
So to take what Peter just told us, imagine you're in a private setting. Unlike the organizational chart, which is public, you're in a private setting and you're making your map. So you're not going to have the figures that I have. You're going to draw circles. And this is no surprise, I'm sure, to anyone here, that you would define you and your boss as an active interdependence. That makes sense. And then Jane and Frank and VJ that report to you, you can see that you've defined that also as an active interdependence. You'll also notice that the arrow goes both ways because relationships go both ways. But now, going back to the organizational chart, what about some of these other relationships? Well, you've defined your relationship with Renee, the administrative assistant to Javier, as active. And with Amanda, the project manager, it makes sense that you define that as active also. Now, Carol, one of your peers, relatively new to the organization, you've defined it as a passive interdependence at this point. Lucy from finance, another peer, you define that as a passive interdependence. And then you've added some more people. Now you'll notice you've added a couple people that are not on the organizational chart, and that's okay. You're making this for you in your own privacy. You've put Larry from legal, but you've also put Candace. Candace is a vendor you can see, and you work a lot with Candace, and you've defined that as a very active interdependence. The next step is to say, well, okay, we've defined this, we've made this map in our own private setting, but does relationships matter? How well we know each other, does that matter? If you've read the second edition of Humble Inquiry or some of the other books from Ed and Peter, you'll notice that they look through the eyes of an anthropologist and they put relationships on 4 levels or on a continuum of -1 to 3. The -1 being a domination and exploitation. Think about a prisoner and a prison guard. But then there's a level 1, and Ed Schein would always say that healthcare was predominantly a level 1, transactional, meaning we're very polite, we're very professional, but we keep our professional distance. Then there's the level 2, an open and trustful, or what we call a personal relationship. In these types of relationships, we start to get answers to questions that we don't even know to ask. And this is what we encourage us to strive for, the level 2, especially when risk is high. Now you might be asking, risk of what? Risk that someone might lie to you, risk that someone doesn't feel comfortable sharing their ideas, their concerns, their suggestions. That's a level 2. And then level 3 we call intimate. Now sometimes people will call it a level 2.5, but we don't necessarily mean intimacy that like you would have with your spouse or family or friends. But sometimes when people work so closely together in an intense environment, they can finish each other's sentences or they know each other's next move. I remember Ed and Peter and I, some time ago, we were sitting around one time talking about if we could only choose one word for each level of the relationship, what would it be? And we came up with these words: antipathy, apathy, empathy, compassion. Peter, what other comments might you add about these relationship levels?
Well, I think the most important thing here is that we have this continuum of -1 to 3, and understand that it's not 0 to 3, it's -1, because 0 would imply there is no relationship, and that would be incorrect. In -1, antipathy, there's very much a relationship. It's just that it's based on domination or exploitation. So don't think of it as no relationship, think of it as a negative relationship. But what's most important in this context is to become acutely aware of the difference between level 1, apathy or professional distance, and level 2, empathy or person or a whole person to whole person relationship. It doesn't mean you're best friends. It doesn't mean you are, spending your weekends together, playing golf or whatever, but it does mean you understand that person. You have a whole person to whole person relationship. You know more than who they are in their role at work. You know who they are as a whole person. And that, we believe, is what the basic foundation for openness and trust. And openness and trust, again, means information gets shared because it benefits a greater cause, or it benefits the organizations as a whole, rather than just being information sharing that's defined by roles. So you mentioned 2.5. In all of our work talking about this, people quickly sort of resonated with the idea of professional intimacy. And part of the reason for that is it captures the time dimension, that you may have relationships that today are level 2, and then you get put on a project with somebody and you're spending 60 hours a week with that person. You develop a level of professional intimacy just by the time you're spending with each other. And those things may not last. Those, so many organizations these days orient around projects more than they do around functions. And so recognize that this scale between 1 to 2 to 2.5, that may come and go, but most importantly, always be thinking about the difference between a distant, professionally distant level 1 relationship where you share what you've agreed to share versus a level 2 relationship where you share what you need to share.
Really good, really good. So now let's take the map that you've made in private and thinking about those 4 relationships. Let's label our map with the relationships. And you can see that what you've done is you've labeled you and Javier as a transactional, even though he's your boss. Carol, your peer, that makes kind of sense if she's new that you've labeled her as a level 1. Now, Candace, that you work with a lot, you've labeled that also as a level 1. But the one that's most notable is you've labeled Lucy as a negative relationship. If we were to fill out the rest of the map, you can see where you've maybe labeled Jane and Frank that report to you as a level 2, an open and trustful relationship. But VJ that also reports to you, you've labeled as a level 1. So now that we have the map, now what are we going to do with it? How are we going to be intentional? So let's have that conversation. In Humble Inquiry, the 2nd edition, Ed and Peter talk about personalizing the relationship. So let's just take a couple samples here. Javier is your boss. You spend a lot of time with your boss. How could you develop a deeper relationship with him? How could it become more open and trusting? Now, Carol, even though she's new to the organization, you can already see how she's going to become very critical over time. How might Humble Inquiry help in that relationship development? But let's take the one that's bringing so much attention, I'm sure, Lucy. A negative relationship. You feel as if Lucy is hostile and exploitative in dealings. You feel like that she tends to, wield the purse strings around like a weapon. How would a better relationship help there? Peter, what comments would you have about this map and how someone might use this if this was their map?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, we've blown through this pretty quickly. This is a hard process. Don't underestimate that when you made the decision to call your relationship with Javier a level 1, there's more I need to do in my relationship with my boss. And that's a hard thing to do. That you have to be very honest with yourself in doing this, and keep it as an active work in progress. A relationship map like this is not something you sort of, file away until the next reorg. This is something that you can keep as an active document for yourself. The level 1 with Carol, well, that's pretty normal. Somebody arrives in a group, a peer of yours, and everybody's like, kind of like, ooh, all right, there's this new person. What are they going to do? What power plays are they going to, sort of unveil and reveal their intent? Or maybe not. maybe it's just you don't know Carol very well because she's only been in the group for 2 weeks. But it's really helpful to sort of have this visual to say, all right, what more do I need to do? With Carol, recognizing that she's a vendor, she's not in the organization, but in a weird way, you both have very strong power relationships with each other, because either you can fire her and find some other vendor, or she can cut you off and leave you, on the hook for not having the products and services you need to get your work done. And so you've got she's got a strong power relationship with you. What you need to have with each other is a mutually influential relationship with each other. You need to be able to influence other more than you need to be able to exert power toward each other. So you might say, oh, this is somebody I really, she's not part of the organization, spend a lot of time with her, actively interdependent with her. I really better draw closer with her so that, I can start to anticipate if things go wrong, she's going to have my back and I'm going to have her back. That's part of what this idea is. If you're professionally distant or you're apathetic toward each other, when things get tough, they do get tough, and more, the world gets tough. We have the next climate problem, the next, in Vermont, a climate crisis in Vermont. Who would have expected that? Well, how do those people deal with crises like that if they don't start to have relationships? And it starts with recognizing that, yes, she really does treat us poorly. And why is that? What can I do, even if it's just getting to a basic level of trust, which we might call level 1? At least she's not wielding those purse strings in a way that's just punitive. It's not actually constructive. So think about this thing as a dynamic, and also allow it to be not just a relationship map, but also kind of a roadmap of things that you need to do. You've got your to-do list and you've got your shadow to-do list, and how this relationship maps inform your shadow to-do list, I would argue is very important. And talk about it with your manager, or with your VP or whatever. Say, I'm going to start working on this. I've got my to-do list, but I'm also going to start working on the shadow to-do list, because my to-do list 6 months from now is going to be deeply influenced by how I worked my shadow to-do list today. So it's an active document. Keep it handy and allow it to point you in directions for the work that you need to do, not just kind of churning through the tasks and processes for which you have direct control, but start thinking about how you can build relationships that will give you influence down the road, so that your job is built more around the influence you have and less around the power or control that you have.
Thank you so much, Peter. And one thing I do want to bring everyone's attention to is, if you'd like to know more about relationship mapping, you can pick up Career Anchors Reimagined, where they have a whole chapter dedicated to that. And then also the second edition of Humble Leadership, which will be out in August of 2023. You can find much more about that. Until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you.